All right. Well, let's critique this morning's sermon then. Now, what out of this morning's sermon stuck out to you? Now, we left last week behind. Now we're into this week's about, what's our topic? The open invitation. The open invitation. Everybody can follow. What stuck out to you? Obviously, I didn't remember the title. What stuck out to you as noteworthy from this morning's sermon? Yeah, it is for everyone. Right. What else? Say that again. You can't? Okay. Right. There are no qualifications to be a follower. You just sign up. Let's go. And it almost seems like Jesus went out of his way to pick out folks whom society would typically not relate with religious folks. Right. A follower is going to work until he wears out. A fan is going to sit and rust. Let me tell you, there's some folks that need some WD-40 around here. So. All right. I found it interesting. I always like the cultural aspect of Scripture. And when he talked this morning about that the disciples of the rabbi reflect upon the rabbi, I thought that was interesting. And that makes sense, doesn't it? And that you wouldn't normally go and pick these losers, sinners of society, common folks like Jesus did. All right. Anything else stand out to you from this morning? All right, well, let's talk a little bit about who is the guy that we focused in on today that Jesus called. Matthew. What do we know about him? We know he was a tax collector, right? What's another King James word for that? Not a Democrat, but a publican. That's right. Not a Republican, just a publican. Yeah, publican. What else do we know about good old Matthew? What's his Hebrew name? Levi. What does that indicate about him? He's from the line of Levi, from the line of the priest of Levi. And he's going to talk about that in the film, the video. I'm dating myself here. It's not a film. It's a video. Anyway. Anything else about Matthew that we know? Probably was rich there, wasn't he? If he was scraping off what he could to make, extorting folks, basically. Say it again. His friends were probably like him as well. What's that? Yeah, he worked for the enemy. Yeah, worked for the occupying nation. It's not a popular thing to do. All right, we're going to watch the video. It kind of goes along with, in fact, every Sunday morning when Pastor shows a clip, you probably noticed this last week, that clip is from the evening's video. So let's watch that. Keep up, because the video, it kind of skips around. It goes from current time to 5 years ago to 30 years ago and back. So I'm just kind of giving you a heads up to keep alert. So let's watch that.
A few years ago, my wife bought this ivory-colored couch for our living room. It was kind of a dangerous gamble because we have these 4 kids running around the house, but they know the rules. I mean, they know they're not allowed on that couch or in that room. But one day my wife was straightening up in that room and she discovered a long-kept secret. She flipped over one of the cushions and she found a stain. It wasn't just any stain, it was pink fingernail polish. We called our 3 daughters into that room, we lined them up and began questioning. I reached towards the couch to flip over the cushion and reveal the stain, but before I had a chance, my middle daughter, Morgan, she cracked. The guilt was too much. She started crying and she ran up the steps. I went after her and followed the sobs. I found her in the corner of a closet with her head between her knees. I got down next to her and I put my hand on her back and tried to comfort her. After a few minutes, the 2 of us went downstairs and she told her mom and me what she had done. And it was a secret that she had kept for a while. She was scared to death that somebody was going to find out. After a few minutes, she looked up at us with those big brown tear-filled eyes and she asked a question that just melted us. She asked, "Do you still love me?" My wife knelt down beside her and she whispered in her ear, "Morgan, you could never make a stain so big that it would keep us from loving you." I wish I could tell you that the stain was no longer there. I wish I could tell you that that couch came clean, but the stain is still there. It's always going to be there. But a funny thing happened. Morgan has started to tell the story of the stained couch. When we have company, she brings them in and she'll show them the couch and the stain. See, I think for her, a stain which once represented guilt and shame and fear, I think now it represents unconditional love. It represents acceptance. It represents grace.
Today, 9:07 a.m.
Hey, Dad. Sorry to bother you, but Mom said to call and remind you to send the alimony check. She still hasn't gotten it. Sorry, this wasn't my idea. Maybe we could see each other soon. Love you.
Message deleted. Next message. Sent yesterday, 4:15 p.m.
Hi, Gary. It's Joyce. Yeah, you may not remember me. You left your phone here last week before you snuck out, jerk.
Message deleted. Next message. Sent yesterday, 3:10 p.m.
Mr. Redmond, I'm calling because you still have an outstanding...
Yeah, is this Joyce? Yeah, I'd like my phone back, please. Yeah, well, there's something on it that I need. And then why did you call me? Great. Yeah, I'll be right over.
In Jesus' time, there was a man named Matthew who had long stopped trying to hide his stain. His family and friends had likely written him off. At the very least, he was a massive disappointment to his own parents. I'm sure they had much different plans for their son. We know this because Matthew had another name, Levi. And that name indicates his parents were expecting him to serve the Lord like the Levites of the Old Testament. From birth, he would have been set aside, destined to be a spiritual leader for the nation of Israel. Matthew's father, grandfather, and great-grandfather were all likely priests who had faithfully served the Lord. By age 12, Matthew would have had the first 5 books of the Bible memorized.
Eyes on your own paper, Gary.
Yes, Miss Winters.
It's probable that Matthew tried to become a disciple of one of the rabbis. But if he sent in his application, it must have been turned down. He didn't make the cut.
Eric, I need it. Come on. Wait. Now.
Eric's the saint. Saint or not, I don't know how much money to this school, much more than him, and I want his son out of here.
Nobody twisted your kid's arm, Bill. Eric's making his own choices.
Don't look so worried, Eric. Your dad's gonna get you out of this. I'm the one who's gonna get nailed to the wall.
It's unnecessary, and perhaps my money could be better spent somewhere else.
Come on, Eric.
Bill!
I'm sorry, Gary.
Now!
What's it gonna be, James?
I'm sorry. Gary needs to find a new school.
He couldn't measure up. Matthew had flunked out of rabbi school. Now, this didn't just mean he was working for the first century equivalent to the IRS. To be a tax collector in Matthew's day, it meant that you were not only taking money from your own people, but that you were giving it to the despised, to the hated, occupying nation, the Romans.
Eric! Come on, man. Come on.
Why take such a job? Well, there was money to be made. The tax collectors would steal from their own people to line their own pockets. Matthew was a religious and social outcast. He was detested.
Did you tell your dad you're going? I didn't. I just left. Getting pretty bold, man. I don't care what he says. Moving around back there. Is that your dad's? Who else? Stealing from my own parents. Guess you could say stooping pretty low, huh? Yeah. But it's not beneath me. Wow. My father deprived you of some fine Christian schooling. Think you're entitled to some compensation. Like I said, man, getting pretty bold.
And you and me, we have a lot in common with Matthew. Because we don't measure up. We don't make the cut. The Bible says in Romans that all of us have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. In other words, none of us are good enough. We've all said things we wish we wouldn't have said. We've all done things we shouldn't have done. And so we scrub and scrub at the stain, but the stain just won't come out. One day, he is sitting at his tax collector booth on a busy street. I'm sure there were many things he wishes he could do over. But it was too late now. His stains would never come out. And we reach this point where we're not sure what to do. And so we live in denial of the stain, or we blame other people for the stain, or we rationalize and justify the stain.
Easy ride.
Or we just live in guilt and fear, hoping somehow no one will notice. But Matthew had reached a point where he was no longer even trying to hide his stain. His friends were prostitutes, thieves, and drunkards. His faults were open for all to see.
We've got to stop doing this.
Yeah, that's what you always say.
By now, Matthew would have been well aware of Jesus and his teachings. He would have known that Jesus wasn't your typical rabbi, but that he was doing things differently. And then one day, Jesus comes by the tax collector's booth of Matthew, and he offers a 2-word invitation. He says, "Follow me." Now, those who overheard the invitation would have been shocked. I'm sure that the other disciples were probably offended because Matthew was a tax collector. He wasn't just a sinner. He sinned for a living. He was a tax collector. And yet Jesus says, "Follow me." The question is, would Matthew do it? And Matthew understood that to follow a rabbi was a 24-hour-a-day commitment. Matthew understood that it was not just knowing what Jesus knows, it was going to be living how Jesus lived. Matthew understood that in order to follow Jesus, he must call Jesus Lord. The word Lord in the New Testament is interesting because most of the time when we hear it, we assume it is a reference to the divinity of Jesus. But in actuality, the Greek word Lord is the word kurios. Now here's what's interesting about this word. It is without question a slavery word. It belongs to the world of slavery. A kurios was the owner of the slave. And so when Matthew calls Jesus Lord, it's not so much an acknowledgement of his sovereignty or of his heavenly residence. It is saying that Jesus is his owner. Now, there's no way to call someone a kurios without calling yourself a doulos. Doulos is the Greek word for slave. A slave had no rights. A slave signed over everything to the master, even his own identity. A slave's one-word job description was obey. So Matthew understood to call Jesus Lord was to call himself a slave. Many fear that being a slave to Jesus means forfeiting your freedom, but in reality, it's only when we make him our master that we truly experience freedom.
Did it pass?
What are we doing in here? Hannah's gonna kill me.
And why? You were just a disorderly passenger. I'm the one who's going to get nailed to the wall.
He's gonna miss church tomorrow. What? Anna and I have been going...
Oh, yeah, Anna. She wants to change you. But I know you better than that. Church ain't going to change you. We went to church when we were kids, and we're doing the same thing.
Yeah, Gary, exactly. We did the same thing when we were kids, and now we're 42 years old.
What's the matter with you?
I don't know. Been getting these chest pains.
Eric Nelson, your wife made your bail. You're free to go.
Well, if she doesn't kill you or turn you into some kind of religious nut, I'll see you later. Come on, Eric, lighten up. Look, I love Jesus just as much as the next guy, but just because I don't go to church...
The next guy's in a jail cell.
Yeah, Eric. Well, you are the next guy, so don't get all high and mighty with me.
Why do you have to insult my wife? Has it ever occurred to you that some people might actually take their beliefs seriously?
Yeah, Eric. Well, people like your dad...
I meet people every week who were slaves to something, but they found freedom when they became a slave to Jesus Christ. They were slaves to possessions or slaves to their own pleasures. They were slaves to people, what other people thought of them. But they discovered that true freedom is only found when they live as a slave to Jesus Christ. Instead of shame and bondage and death, we find joy and grace and eternal life. You will never know true freedom until you have completely surrendered and become a slave to Jesus Christ.
She wants a divorce. What happened?
I don't know. I woke up to go to work this morning. The kids were gone, and I found that.
It's all right, Eric. Just calm down.
Don't tell me to calm down. It's not all right.
Eric, listen to me. I've been... Eric.
Breathe.
Eric. All right. All right. What's going on?
I can't breathe. Oh, God, not
right.
now, please.
Hold on. Hold on. It's all right.
If being a slave to sin has left you broken and bruised, and you find your life in pieces, my master loves you, and if you let him, he will take the pieces of your life and turn them into a beautiful mosaic. My master invites all who are weary and heavy burdened to come to him and find rest for your souls, because his yoke is easy and his burden is light. And when you become a slave to my master, he makes you a son, he makes you a daughter, he calls you a friend.
Mr. Nelson, we've confirmed that you've had a very serious heart attack. We still need a few more tests to be sure, but the results from the electrocardiogram indicate to me that the cause of your attack was hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. It's a condition in which...
Matthew finds himself at a tax collector's booth.
This hardening
all day long, his own people remind him of what a failure and what a disappointment he is.
Why? What did I do?
And then a rabbi stops in front of the booth.
In some cases, this condition is caused by a virus.
Perhaps Matthew assumes that this rabbi will point a finger and tell everyone who will listen about his stains and of what a disgrace this tax collector is to God. Instead, Jesus says, "Follow me."
The important thing to know is that this could very well happen again. I'd like to discuss a surgery, but I can't stress enough the importance of lifestyle changes. But we'll talk more after the tests are conclusive and after you've had a chance to rest.
Thank you, Doctor. Look, Eric. Advice is cheap. But Anna is stressing you out. You talk about lifestyle change, start there.
What if I had died, Gary?
You didn't.
I will one day. What would I have left behind? What if God's trying to tell me something?
Like what? Get more exercise?
I gotta stop doing this.
That's what you always say.
And what would Matthew do? Here's what we read. Matthew got up and followed him.
I need you to leave.
When Jesus said to Matthew, "Follow me," he was making it clear that his invitation to follow is not just for the religious elite or for the morally upright, for those who have their lives together. His invitation is for all of us who are hiding some stains. Jesus said, "Anyone who would come after me must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me." Anyone. Anyone is a pretty inclusive word. Anyone can follow Jesus. Anyone who's ever thought to themselves, "I've gone too far, my stain is too big." Anyone who's ever laid awake at night and said, "I can't believe what I've done." Anyone who's ever looked in the mirror and said to themselves, "I can't believe what I've become." Anyone can follow. Anyone who knows down deep that they've got really nothing to offer Jesus. Really, it's what Jesus offers us that changes things. On the day he said to Matthew, "Follow me," something changed in him that day. And how do we know all this about Matthew's life? I mean, how do we know about his past failures and mistakes? It's because he tells us. I mean, he invites us into the living room. He shows us the stains on the couch. And he tells us a story of love and grace. And these days, when people speak of Matthew, they don't think of him as some tax collector who sold his soul to the Roman government for a paycheck. No, we remember Matthew as one of the 12 disciples. We remember him as a follower of Jesus Christ.
Please.
But just because Matthew left his past behind and started following Jesus doesn't mean he was perfect. Far from it. Even after we decide to follow Jesus, we continue to need his grace for the journey. But here's the thing, his grace doesn't just invite us to follow, it teaches us to follow.
First, saved message, sent July 27th, 2007.
Gary, it's me, Eric. We haven't talked since that day. I've had a lot of time to think. 3 years. You were right, what you said in jail. Church can't change people. Anna can't change me. But God can change anyone. I know that's a heavy thing to drop to you on a voicemail, but maybe we could talk about that in person. I hope you'll call me back so we can, and so I can ask for your forgiveness, because I wasn't always the best friend to you, and I'm sorry. Give me a call. Bye.
And we find ourselves at the same crossroads as Matthew. You're guilty. You know what you deserve. You know what you have coming. But the words of Jesus are words full of grace. He says, "Follow me." You think there must be a mistake. And doesn't he know who I am? Doesn't he know what I've done? What about my stains?
Sorry to bother you.
Yeah, no problem, Gary.
I really need to talk to someone. Is this a bad time?
You're fine. If you want, you can just have a seat on the couch.
Thanks.
Okay.
I guess the first thing
Jesus knows your stains. In fact, he died on the cross so that all our stains could be washed clean. So how much longer will you live with these regrets? How much longer will you say, maybe tomorrow? When will you let God's grace replace your guilt? When will you accept a fresh start and a second chance? When will you respond to the simple, gracious words of Jesus? Follow me.
Could anybody identify with sitting in the principal's office? Yes, I see that hand, Mr. Hooks. Did you keep up with all that shifting back and forth in time? Maybe it's just me that has a problem with that. I don't know. All right. What are your thoughts on that? What's something you can take away after watching that? About God's grace, yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does give hope, doesn't it? When God looks, what's the song? He looked beyond my sin, is how that song goes. My faults. That's it. Thank you, Miss Betty. Look beyond my faults and saw my need. Now, what he does do is, let's talk about it was the woman caught in adultery, that story. You know, very graceful there, right? If you're without sin, cast the first stone, and nobody was left, right? What was the last thing he told her? Go and sin no more, right? So, yeah, if we're to come to Jesus just as I am, as the old imitation hymn goes. But he doesn't just say everything's okay. He wants to change us. He wants to radically change us. So yeah, you're exactly right. Very, very much hope. What else? Anything else? He talked about the way that sometimes people rationalize away the stain, or they blame the stain on someone else. How might somebody do that? Yeah, he made me do it, she made me do it, or as Flip Wilson would say, the devil made me do it. Yeah, there's some older folks in here. Okay, that's right. Yeah, I was raised this way, I was born this way, my parents did it, and it's just genetic or whatever. Lots of excuses for the stain. Well, let's look at the passage that we looked at this morning. Excuse me. Out of Matthew 9. It'll be on the screen. Well, I don't have it all written out. Matthew chapter 9, starting in verse 9. It's Jesus calling Matthew. It says, as Jesus passed on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax booth. And he said to him, "Follow me." And he rose and followed him. And as Jesus reclined at the table in the house, behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and were reclining with Jesus and his disciples. And when the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" But when he heard it, he said, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick." All right, same passage there that we looked at this morning. We've heard it this morning. We've heard it preached on. We've heard a little bit kind of in the storyline here. Anything new kind of jump out to you or just really hit you in that passage? Yes, but you said sometimes Christians feel that people should get their act together, get all cleaned up and prettied up and before they come to church. And I'm going to say, probably generally speaking for our church, we're probably not as bad as, not to compare ourselves, but as other churches may be, or as maybe we were 10 or 15 years ago. That's just a guess since I wasn't here 10 or 15 years ago. But I think our church is I don't know, it just seems to be a little more open and welcoming than, and I'm sure there are individuals, that somebody comes in and it's like, what are they doing here? I'm sure there are some pockets of that, but I think as a whole, I think we probably do a pretty good job. Right. The person themselves may have that same thought that I've got to get my act together. I've got to get all cleaned up before I can not just go to church, but just talk to God or pray or whatever to make that first move, right? When I was at Mountain Home, I had a couple of letters written, just generic letters to the church, and I took the pleasure of answering those. Both of them had to do with, and let me preface this by saying, Mountain Home is a retirement community. Lots of retired folks there. That's why the insurance rates are so high. Excuse me. But anyway, and so I understand kind of where people were coming from here in their letter, but and people that weren't sloppy. But anyway, the concern in the two letters had to do with just the manner that people dressed up on Sunday. And shouldn't people, and you've heard it, you probably said it, I know I have, about dressing our best for the Lord or something like that. And so I'm going to read you part of my letter here. You asked about our congregation's position on the casualness of one's appearance at church. Well, it's not like we have a manual or something on that, right? We don't have a formal position on this matter, but I believe if one looks around the auditorium on any given Sunday, a person will note that most attenders will have on nice clothes. There are some, however, that do not. As a staff, our thought is that people should be welcomed into church regardless of their clothing, providing that it's decent. Okay, we'll go along with that. We certainly wouldn't suggest anyone come to the sanctuary wearing a bikini. However, if someone's wearing jeans and a T-shirt, why shouldn't they be welcomed? There are some in our church who honestly don't own any better clothes than that. This brings up the issue of subjectivity. Apparel considered church clothes by one may not be nice enough for another. Do men need to have on ties? What about pants on women? Another concern would be price and style. Which is more acceptable? A man wearing a nice pair of khakis and a polo shirt, or a man wearing a 30-year-old $3 jacket and tie recently purchased from the Salvation Army? With so many subjective topics, we feel that these issues are best left for God's conviction through an individual's conscience. Probably not what he wanted to hear, but and I understand, people, especially older people who grew up with that mindset of, got to dress our best to go into the Lord's house. I understand that thought, but to not welcome, to think that we shouldn't allow people in because of whatever, it's just a little bit too much for me. But soon after that, I came down here. All right. Don't know if those two are connected or not. All right. Well, Jesus certainly, as we looked here in the passage and we've mentioned, he hung out with sinners, didn't he? And that's one thing. The more we become church folk, the more we become churchified or whatever, the less that happens, I think. If you think, if you've been a Christian, let's say, for 30 years, and you're one of these, you're here on Sunday night, so that tells me something. You probably don't have a lot of non-churched, unbelieving friends. It's just the way we are, because like kind of attracts like. And so we tend to hang out with our church friends or whatever, and we may have a few, or whatever, but we don't really make an effort, I don't think. Jesus made that effort to go out of his way. Now, is there a downside to that? Is there a caution to that? That may be their closest connection to Jesus. You're right. Yep. You are exactly right. Okay. What Miss Shirley's saying is that if we just hang around with our churchified folks, that sometimes we might become judgmental because it's like us and them kind of mentality, and oh, look at them and that kind of thing. So, great. Sounds something like that, yes. What were some of those stains that were in Matthew's life? Yeah, corruption. He was a thief. It doesn't come out and say that, but just based on what his occupation was, we know that. What else? All right, what else? What other stains in Matthew's life? Serving the enemy. He was a cheat. He was a thief. He was rebellious. And more than likely. Okay. Hated by his own people, had a hated occupation, all those kind of things. Sometimes it's that stain that we've mentioned this that keeps people from coming to church, coming to Christ. I've got to clean up my act first. But it's kind of like the coffee or probably wine would have been better, but since we're in a Southern Baptist church, I thought coffee would be probably better. And more applicable since we've got so many stains here coffee stains on our carpet. But, you get the grape juice stain on the carpet. Man, that is almost impossible to get out. And sometimes people think, I've got to clean up the stain in my life before I come to Christ or to church, like we've been saying. It also is that stain sometimes keeps people in the fan stage. Let's say they're a believer, but they're just not a committed, true follower. And sometimes they just have these issues that they're dealing with. I know when I've had to ask people before to be Sunday school teachers or to be deacons or whatever, and a lot of times their answer is, no, I'm not good enough. Well, you know what I tell them? You're absolutely right. You're not. Yeah, you might have a few stains or whatever, but, no one's worthy in their own right. Now, we've got to be careful not to use this as an excuse to sin either. I've got some stains or whatever, or I'm not perfect, just forgiven. Okay, that's a nice thing. That's a good bumper sticker, I guess, but it can come across a little too high and mighty, a little too pious sometimes. All right, whom does God call? Another trick question. Yeah, like we've talked about today, anyone, everyone. Whom can God call and use? Same answer, yes. Thank you, Elizabeth. Can you think of some people in the Bible with less than stellar reputations that God used? Paul Saul. Now, what was some of his stains? He was a Christian killer. Yeah. What else? Who else? David. What was his stain or stains? Murderer, adulterer, all the above. Wow. Moses was a murderer as well. Yeah. Wow. Could he use people that actually denied him, like Peter? Just flat out cursed and said, I don't know who this guy is. Right? You've probably heard this or something like this. It's the fictitious pastor search committee report. We do not have a happy report to give. We've not been able to find a suitable candidate for this church, though we have one promising prospect still. We do appreciate all the suggestions from church members, and we followed up on each with interviews or at least calling 3 references. The following is our confidential report on the present candidates. Adam, good man, but problems with his wife. Noah, former pastor of 120 years with few converts, prone to unrealistic building programs. Joseph, big thinker but a braggart, believes in dream interpreting and has a prison record. Solomon, great preacher, but our parsonage would never hold all those wives. Elijah, prone to depression under pressure. Hosea, a tender and loving pastor, but our people could never handle his wife's occupation. John says he's a Baptist, but definitely doesn't dress like one. He has slept outdoors for months on end, has a weird diet, and provokes denominational leaders. Paul, powerful CEO-type leader and fascinating preacher, however, short on tact, unforgiving with young ministers, harsh, and has been known to preach all night. Timothy, too young. Judas, his references are solid, a steady plodder, conservative, good connections, knows how to handle money. We're inviting him to preach this Sunday. We're excited about the possibilities here. You know, all that to say, just because you're stained doesn't mean God can't use you. And kind of the flip side is just because you have an unstained appearance doesn't mean that you're used by God. Have y'all ever heard of cardboard testimonies? You ever heard that? This has been around for a few years. My church in Mountain Home, I was telling you about, a couple of years ago, this is after I came here, did these cardboard testimonies. I'm going to let you see some of these here in a minute, where people just come out, and one side is kind of talks about their life before, and they flip it, and it's the life after. And so I've tried to enlarge it so it might be a little bit grainy, and you might not be able to read every one, but let's watch this cardboard testimony. People were pretty transparent, weren't they? Mm-hmm. So who can God use? Sure can. Sure can. No matter what the stain is. Some of those stains that keep us from God are the things that we do and have done. We've seen those. Some of those medical conditions, some people can hide behind those sometimes. Grief that we go through, those kind of things. So God can still use those things. Well, let's take a minute. I'm going to let you pray where you are. I'm going to close this here in just a minute. And I got something else to tell you right after that. But just pray that Lord would help you, if you got any of those stains, to get over them. So let's take a couple of minutes to pray silently. Lord, we're so thankful for your word and the truthfulness of it that allows us to see folks like Matthew and other people who were far from perfect. It just gives us hope and confidence, Lord, that you can use even us. Lord, I pray if there are some things that maybe people are holding on to that maybe consciously or subconsciously, Lord, they've been using as excuses from serving you and becoming a true follower, Lord, that you would help them to get over that. Lord, to just help remind them, remind us all, Lord, of how we certainly can't clean that stain on our own. That is your job. And it may leave a mark, but Lord, you can help us learn from that and serve despite that. Lord, I thank you for this study and how folks just seem to really enjoy this and are getting a lot out of it. And I pray, Lord, you'd help us to put into practice what we learn. Lord Jesus, we love you very much. I pray these things in your name. Amen. All right, let me remind you about the books that are up here that don't cost you anything. You may get those. Your homework, like I said, is optional, but it'll just help you get a little bit more out of it. And that's all I've got. You are dismissed.